So we're going to talk about Nothing Like Us Ever Was. It's part of your Millennial Musical Trilogy. This is the first of them. It has 32, really 24 scenes in a reprise. It's a rock opera, but it also uses classical music and I think some religious hymns too throughout it.
And also some rope jumping rhymes and songs.
Yes. I find it very interesting. I think that the rock part of it is a little more revelatory than some of the classical music, although I think those are used very well. And it's interesting to read this play versus to see it on stage in either version. I think that it works sort of like a Shakespearean play in the high and low mix when you read it, but I think on stage it would look a lot different because either one or the other version would be used.
Well, also there's basically three possible versions. There's the rock version, which is the preferred one. There'd be the alternate version, and then there would be like the combined version of some nut job in 150 years wanted to do like the alternate scenes before or after with it. You know, you could, I guess, somehow do that. But the title "Nothing Like Us Ever Was" does come from Carl Sandburg's Four Preludes on Playthings of the Wind. And I think I've mentioned this before to you. I don't know if on camera. I think that's probably the best poem of Sandburg's. It's the richest, deepest poem that he ever wrote, and it's a poem that deals with a lot of the same things that Eliot's The Wasteland dealt with, but it does it much better. It's a much better poem than The Wasteland, and that's the title not only comes from that, but so does the epigraph, which is, "And the wind shifts, and the dust on the doorsill shifts, and even the writhing of the rat footprints tell us nothing, nothing at all about the greatest city, the greatest nation, where the men listened and the women warbled," which to warble means to sing. So this is a really good quote because this is about the late 60s, early 70s time, the age of Aquarius, the summer of love, the hippie movement, the anti-Vietnam, the civil rights, the Watergate stuff. This is the stuff that I grew up and was born into, and so this is really just a perfect epigraph. And Sandburg is right there with Whitman as sort of the all-American poet, and so it's really.
I think the title works so differently than it does in the poem, because in the poem it works like the best part of The Wasteland, but this one it's not showing a blank nation. It's showing a lot of life in this part. It's much more of a quote unquote time capsule than it is in the poem. It's sort of the same way that you used the title and Turns Out to Be Here differently than Wallace Stevens used the phrase in Crude Foyer.
Yeah, well, you don't want to just recapitulate things totally. This also has probably the most characters in it of all the plays.
It has a gigantic cast.
Yeah. So this
was in the stage directions though that some of the main parts like the pastor, Candy, etc., should probably not play the multiple roles, but some of the actors can cross over, especially with the hippie characters, things that are non-essential parts.
Yeah, and it's a play that. In a sense, I think you had said it reminds you of, I guess, a little bit of True Life, some of the stuff. And it does. It's sort of like a condensed version of True Life. It has a bigger purview, sort of like Vincetti Brothers or Norwegian in the Family. It basically, I could have called this, if I wasn't going to go with a Sandburg title, something like the choices of Danny Wagner or something, because Danny is confronted with basically three different types of living, or three different sets of ethos. There's him as the Sunday school kid, and he's always rebelling against the pastor, him and his sister. Then there's Danny as the New Age kid, not the New Age, but the age of Aquarius, the hippie kind of values of the late 1960s, the sort of Godspell hair, Jesus Christ Superstar kind of vibe. And then there's the more Dan Schneider kind of, there's mobsters and gangsters and violence in this thing. So there were sort of three competing world views here, and even maybe a fourth one with a few scenes between Danny and his father, mostly his dad.
Uh, Plus, the individual characters also make their own choices. I also find it interesting how the music is able to distill their lives, but not necessarily Danny's life. Uh,
What?
where whether it's Candy or Derek, when you have some of these musical pieces that distill their entire life,
Yeah.
you don't get the same sense with Danny that his life can be condensed in a single song.
Well, these songs, this musical would be using already established songs from different groups. This is why I think it's the best musical too. Is no songwriter, no matter how great they could be, could write as consistently good songs as you can pick from 200 or 400 possible songs that could go into it. Uh, and so this is one of the plays that's the least based directly on Danny's life. The stuff with Danny and the pastor and the Sunday school, that's very close to what happened with Danny. Uh, a character like Ziggy makes a reappearance here. From the last time I used him was in my True Life memoirs, but Ziggy apparently lives in a universe where there's a Danny Schneider and a Danny Wagner, and he doesn't seem to notice that they're pretty similar, apparently. Or maybe it's just an alternate version of Ziggy. Then there's let's see, the past and stuff. And there was, for example, a red-haired girl that turns out to have the name Jenny Eccles. But there was a real red-haired girl, a hippie girl that I used to sit on the lap of when I was 4 or 5 years old. This girl is called Jennifer Eccles or Jenny Eccles because of the song by the Hollies called Jennifer Eccles. There's Candy who and Betty, who are prostitutes, and I took them from two songs, Black Betty by Ram Jam in the late 70s, who's a black prostitute, and then the white prostitute Candy from a Golden Earring song. And so I worked in some of their, by using their songs, it allowed me to make this thing that is only maybe about 25 to 30% based in what really happened in my life. But that doesn't really matter. Danny Wagner is different from me, so Candy and Betty and even the Jenny Eccles character was similar, vaguely similar to people that I knew, as were some of the other characters.
Now, the day that I read this, I thought it was probably your best play, and then upon reflection, I still think it's one of your best plays, but I'm not sure if I'd rank it at the very top. But I certainly think it's in competition. I'm not sure if you disagree with me, but you just thought it was an interesting choice. But it obviously can't have the richer characterizations that the Conn plays have or the Henry Miller play. But I think that there's so many interesting sketches throughout this, and it's a different animal too than the other plays. Those are much more character driven. This one is much more about getting this time and place, as the title reflects.
Yeah, and it, in a sense, because nothing like us ever was, there's the collective sense. So it is more about the larger sense, the zeitgeist, rather than the individual characters. Now, if you know who Danny Wagner is and you've read other plays, or if you know things that I've written about, if you know the Vincetti brothers and whatnot, this makes something. No, hold on here. Hold on. Jessica, come on. She got bit. One of my cats nipped her toe or something while she's exercising. Anyway, what was I saying?
You were talking about it distilling the zeitgeist.
Yeah. So yeah, that's basically it. That's it's got a larger purview.
Yeah, I think it was the play This Unalterable Animal that you said was a play in verse. This one is literally and figuratively the same type, but they're done very differently.
Yeah, well, I mean, this one is more based on music, and I've used music before, and I've used it here and there. The play with the Jerry the Jew character had that I think it's Shostakovich music and whatnot. But here, this is a flat out musical, although it has more dialogue and more sketching of characters outside of just their singing parts. And I think that's one of the things that makes it, other than the fact that I also use better songs, the consistency of the song quality is as higher than any musical I'm aware of. But uh, it's it's a play that's a musical. Most musicals, you just get these offhanded characters, and you don't really get anything deeper. And I wanted to add that depth, and I think I do. Again, because a lot of the revelation and the telling of the story is dependent upon the pop songs or some of the alternate stuff that I use. It's not going to be as, you know, O'Neill